Everyone, and welcome to today's presentation on maintaining security with a remote workforce. My name is Tyson Chotame, and I'm Executive Vice President of Broadview Networks. So today we're going to talk about how you maintain security with a remote workforce, what the concerns are when you have a remote workforce, and focus on those specific security issues as opposed to other security presentations that Broadview Networks has hosted in the past, which have been about general security issues overall. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about remote workforce security risks and concerns. We're going to talk about updating and communicating your security policies. What do you need to change or factor into your security policies, specifically about remote workers, remote environments, and the new security risks that they bring into your organization. And today, of course, with everything going on and so many people working from home, a lot of us might have rushed to get people set up for remote access and didn't necessarily have a chance to apply all the proper policies or take into concern all of the issues for how people are doing that. And that's something we definitely want to be doing going forward. Multi-factor authentication and password best practices. How do we make sure that when people are using remote resources, whether they be the resources from our corporate networks, whether they be resources from the cloud, that we're providing the same password protection and multi-factor authentication from people connecting from work devices or home devices from outside of the corporate network, where we generally have a stronger sense of trust. We're going to talk about cybersecurity education, how important that is now that people are working from different networks and, again, working outside of that center of trust we generally have within our corporate networks. We're going to talk about monitoring and reporting on staff activities and different options for that, and home ISP performance and the security issues that potentially come when we access resources remotely, depending on the networks we're accessing them from and the access method that we're using. So why is security important? These are some overarching security items that I want to talk about that aren't specifically to remote workforce, and then I'll get into the remote workforce one. So protecting personal and corporate data is always an important security consideration whenever we're using a computer and using applications in any way inside of an organization. We want to make sure that data is properly protected. You may have regulatory compliances that you need to meet depending on the type of organization you are and what types of customers or what types of business you do. We want to limit risk and exposure of the organization. We want to limit risk and exposure of the individuals that are part of the organization. And we want to focus on talking about what the remote access risks are. So with what's going on right now, all the time we've got potential risks of phishing and scams and the bad actors out there that are using the technology that we use every day as a way to profit. And now with COVID-19 and some of the more serious concerns that are coming, we're seeing that huge spike has happened in fraud and potential theft related to COVID-19. So the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre has seen a huge number of increase in reports. We see information on Twitter, on Facebook, on regular email phishing. And now that we have people working from home, we have to be more concerned about social media and those types of risks than potentially we did when the people were working from the office, because we're not behind the corporate firewall anymore. So we don't have the same protection necessarily either for those work computers now being used from home or potentially people's home computers, depending on how they're configured and what security they have set up. Another example is hackers are spreading fake Android coronavirus trackers. So, there's for stealing Bitcoin, there's all kinds of different risks. These are just different examples that I was trying to spread out across different media, different platforms, and how it could be affecting different types of devices and the ramp up of it that's happening right now. Email security is always important, and we see this as an item that we're constantly talking to customers about and constantly helping customers from a security training perspective and an awareness perspective, and looking for, email addresses that look almost right but are actually not right, looking for URLs that are fake and aren't ones that we can trust, and highlighting the difference in a specific letter is something we've focused on before. Now we need to be concerned about COVID-19 specific related scams. This shows the growth of COVID-19 related emails in February as we saw the spread of the virus and the amount of COVID threats as a percentage of total mail, a significant increase, and that was early March, and it's just increased since. We see a fake Corona update email that's trying to get people to log into their OneDrive to get, coronavirus information uploaded to their OneDrive. Is that a place you would expect to want to be accessing coronavirus information from? No, but that's possibly something that people may click on if they're not sure what to do. And helping people distinguish real outbreak event information from fake outbreak event information. And cybersecurity training is an important way to be able to do that. Web browsing. At work, when you're web browsing, you have a lot of places you can help control what your users are doing. You can have firewalls on your work computers. You have a gateway firewall that helps control that. And education is important as well, making sure people understand the difference between being on an insecure website versus being on a secure website. This is very important if they're going to websites that are related to any type of information, and certainly understanding the risks of, pop-ups on a website that are not a real security error that is telling you that there's, the site contains malware and, click this number or press this button. And in reality, this is just a scam. Again, inside your corporate network, on the devices you get to control, you'd be able to potentially block this and limit it. With people working outside the corporate network, depending on how they're connecting to the internet or working from their home computers, we may not have as much control in place, and either we need to potentially add that control or we need to help educate users even more for how to protect themselves because they may not have seen these types of risks before. And then we have to prepare people for actual COVID-19 specific risks and website risks. So a website that's a fake COVID-19 or CDC website, and it's asking people to log in with a Gmail or an Outlook.com or an Office 365, a valid account that we don't want them getting out into the wild. Policies are important. If you're going to have people working from home, we need to have guidelines on how people are going to use home computers from work, work computers from home, and guidelines and policies need to protect the organization from the action of employees and the employees from the actions of the organization. If you're going to expect people to use their home computers for work, and you're going to install software to make that happen, then you have to have an agreement with the employee for that, or decide how you want to manage that inside of your organization. Policy should be part of a hiring process or a contract with your employees, and it should define how rules apply to different roles and responsibilities. You may have different security and privacy policies, and of course different remote workforce policies depending on what type of work people are doing. And you want to set the expectations of risks, consequences, and remediations that go with breaching any of those policies. So focusing on remote work policies, we want to understand what forms of remote access the organization permits and which ones users shouldn't be doing. Yeah, they can access work resources from work devices, but you may have a policy that says they're not allowed to access work resources from home computers, and you want to make sure you're enforcing that policy and making that clear to people. What types of remote devices are permitted to be used? Some companies allow personal devices and home devices to connect to the corporate resources, others do not, and maybe different rules for different users again. What type of access is granted to each teleworker, and what are they going to be able to do? Do those remote devices have the proper security controls, patching? Do they need to have unnecessary services disabled? AV and firewall services, and I missed adding the wall part to fire, but what controls are in place on those remote client devices. And even if you're taking work devices home, the same controls and security tools that you have in place on those work devices may not operate the same way from outside your corporate network. So do we need to review and help you understand how are those security policies and those security applications going to work from a different network? All components of remote access should be secured, including personal devices, remote access secured against any types of expected or unexpected threats, and ensure that any internal resources they make available has, the limited amount of access that you can put in place. Even if you do need to make it available remotely, you want to put as much controls on it as possible. Some policy assumptions you should consider. You should consider all remote environments hostile, and you should consider that any external resources or any external networks have resources that want to gain access to your network. And they may not, but you want to think and work from an assumption that they do when you're preparing your security practices and policies and the infrastructure you're going to put in place. You should assume that malicious parties want to utilize your remote workforce as a way to get in. You have to understand what makes sense for your users. You have to define that balance between access and risk. Yeah, you want to keep your system very secure. I mean, in all fairness, the most secure system no one can access, but it's not very usable for your users. So we want to balance it. And everyone, or a lot of organizations right now, are probably on the access side of the scale more than the security side of the scale, especially over the last few weeks as announcements came out and people started moving quickly to work from home. You may want to revisit what was set up and why it was set up, and have a conversation with us about, should you be pulling back some access, adding on additional controls? What should be done to make sure that you're going back to the security side of the equation right now? Virtual meetings. We've been hearing lots in the media about Zoom. They've been having some bad press around what's happened with their platform. Some of it's the challenges of the platform. A lot of it's the way people are using the platform. Don't reuse meeting codes or identifiers. Every meeting should have a unique meeting code, a unique identifier. For events like this, where you're broadcasting to a large number of people, use the broadcasting format as opposed to the meeting formats that people can't inject content into it. Require sensitive passwords for sensitive meetings. Use multi-factor authentication to access and get into the meeting system. Limit recording options and access to those recordings. Disable unnecessary features, chat, screen sharing. Who can start a screen sharing session during a meeting? You want to make sure those controls are in place. And again, you may have put additional meeting capabilities into the existing tools you had, or recently put a new tool in place to allow this for your remote users. It's probably a good idea to do a security review of the policies that have been set. Limit who can do what, and don't apply a blanket policy to everyone. Different groups of users will need different policies, and make sure you apply those policies appropriately. But again, we do still need to strike a balance between security and ease of use. We want people using these systems. We want them getting the benefits of them, so we don't want to lock them down too tight that they aren't usable. Passwords are still important. I don't want to lose track of how critical passwords are for that first line of security. A proper password should be in place. Again, generally speaking, companies don't get hacked. You don't hack a company, you hack the people in a company to get in. And with people being at home, there's more potential exposure, especially from the home computers, because there's more potential attack vectors of those home computers if they don't have proper security in place. Record passwords securely. Care in using work passwords on home computers. People could have keyloggers installed they don't know about. People could have other Trojans or viruses or threats in place that you don't know about. So we want to be careful with this as much as possible and be educating our users on this. The most sensitive resources should always have the most complex passwords. And best practice is actually use a password management app. I can tell you right now, I don't know a significant number of my passwords. I couldn't tell you what they are right now. They're stored in my password management app. My password management app is two-factor authentication protected, and I copy and paste them out of that password management app when I need them, or I load them into websites from the password management app, and that way I don't even know what they are and I'm not reusing the same passwords. You know, not that long ago, we were saying no birth dates, no personal names, no repeated characters as guidelines for password rules. Now we want complex passwords. We want a mix of letters, small and capital. We want some special characters in there and a minimum of 8 characters. And I would say these days, probably even better, a minimum of 10 characters. But the real question with passwords becomes, are passwords even safe enough anymore? Do passwords really get it done for us? And the short answer is, by themselves, passwords are not safe anymore. And that's why two-factor and multi-factor authentication are, you know, different names for the same idea. And we're recommending this for any service that is being accessed remotely and anything that has any critical business information in it, potentially even inside the office. Just as a recap, if you haven't used any two-factor or multi-factor authentication applications in the past, typically you're going to go to a website or an application, you're going to put in your username and password, and then you're going to get prompted for some extra factor of authentication. This site, for example, gives me the option of an SMS text message or a phone call, and then I can type in the token that I receive via the SMS text message. And this is good. It's better than just passwords. The downside to this method is there are risks with the SIM card being stolen, or the SIM card being cloned, or someone else taking over your SIM card and then actually being able to receive your SMS messages. And if someone's targeted you through social engineering and has gathered information and knows your mobile phone number, then they could potentially take advantage of that to see the two-factor information that's coming to you over text messages. And to prevent that, we recommend two-factor authentication applications. So an application running on a smartphone, and either it's a rolling code that is generated by the application that you type in, or you may have a physical token that you carry around with you that has that rolling code, or it's an app that does a push approval. So you put in your username and password, and then up on the app, pops this view, and you click the approve button, and then it allows you in. Easiest thing for the users to use and very secure. So whether we have all of these things in place or not, education is a key to any good security strategy and security platform. And cybersecurity training is really the start of that. And with a lot of users working remotely, potentially you want to review what cybersecurity training has been provided in the past, and you may want to provide a new round of cybersecurity training that's focusing on those extra risks from home. How to identify phishing emails and dangerous website and bad links. What to do if you're not sure. You know, maybe people aren't as comfortable or thinking the same about, well, do I call help desk or do I call my support provider when I'm seeing something I'm not sure about on my home computer? What should I be doing? We should be communicating that to people. Making sure people understand to report a breach or report something that they're not sure about. You know, the worst case scenario is someone sees something skeptical and is scared to do anything about it and doesn't know what they should do and does nothing, and then some sort of a security event takes place because of it. And this security training we can do virtually, so we can do this over Teams and other technologies, even in the current situation, and provide this training to your users, if you think it's a benefit. We also have dark web monitoring and phishing testing, and this is in the education area because the dark web monitoring allows us to notify you and your users potentially if their passwords have been compromised on the dark web. So it's a service that scans a lot of different resources in the dark web that hold compromised passwords and gives us the ability to know that those passwords have been compromised and communicate that to you and your users. Along with that, we can do phishing testing. So we can send test phishes out to your users, and if they fail, it automatically puts them through a retraining video explaining to them why, or gives them the option to watch the video, telling them why and what they failed on in that phishing testing. Now, oversight's important. You know, people working from home, we want to understand productivity, and different organizations may have different concerns about what the productivity of their remote workers are. From an IT perspective, there's a number of different ways we can potentially look at this. We can look at VPN access reports if you're using VPN, and potentially even drill down into the VPN traffic and see what are your users using when they're on the VPN. Are they using the applications you're expecting them to use? And is there active traffic? Well, if they're using the applications and there's active traffic, then it's probably pretty safe to say that they're doing work. Remote desktop access reports if you're using remote desktop technologies. Application logs from your applications that you use. Does it give you utilization information and utilization reports? And if you have specific users, generally you're not going to do this for everyone, but if you have specific users you're not sure about, the option could be to implement screen capturing software on their computers so you can actually scrape the screens on a regular basis and go back and review that and see what those users are actually doing throughout the day. You may also want to lock down certain applications from certain users when they're working remotely to limit some types of access and limit some web access and internet access if that's a part of your remote access configuration. So let's talk about remote access configurations and the performance and security impacts that we see from some of the more common remote access configurations. So VPN is probably one of the most common. It's been around for quite a long time. A lot of organizations use this quite extensively, and maybe using it with a lot more users now. And just to recap how VPN operates, you have software installed, usually on a laptop or potentially on someone's home desktop, and they're connected to their home network, which is then connected to the internet, and they start up the VPN software, and it builds a tunnel through the internet to your firewall back at your office, and then provides users access to the resources in the office, really like this device is sitting in the office. Imagine just taking a network cable and dragging it all the way to your house and plugging it into that device. And that's what VPN provides. It's a good, solid technology. It works very well. It's very understandable for how to implement and, for the most part, how to support. But VPN does have some challenges. Depending on how your VPN is configured, this device and the network that this device, this remote device is on, can potentially expose the corporate network to heightened risk. If this device has been compromised, or if something else on this network has been compromised, this device could become a conduit back to the corporate network. So that's something that we want to make sure we have really good rules on the firewall, maintaining and controlling what type of traffic is passing across this VPN and getting from this side of the VPN to the actual corporate network. Depending on your applications, they may not run very well over a VPN connection, because those applications may be designed to run over a faster network connection, and the VPN doesn't necessarily take into account the fact that you're now coming across an internet connection. The application doesn't know that, so it acts the same as if you're on the local network on this side that's very fast, not across an internet connection that could be much slower. VPN can be complicated for users. They have to understand when to start the VPN, when to stop the VPN. They may have trouble with the VPN operating. Some ISPs may limit VPN functionality, so they may not be able to make a VPN connection. It generally works well with corporate devices where it's been pre-configured and tested and set up well and it's known, but it can be a bit more of a challenge on personal devices. It does provide access generally to all services. So again, depending on the rules you have in your firewall, you can have it wide open for what on the corporate network can be seen, or you can lock it down. And that can be both a security control and a security risk. So it's something we have to consider when looking at VPN. It can be a security risk for those personal devices. Again, now the personal device at home is connected. Now the corporate network is potentially a risk to that personal device. It's probably less of a risk because the corporate network is usually more secure, but it's something that should be exposed to your users. They should know that that's a fact and get agreement from them if you're going to have them put VPN software on their personal device from home. You should have two-factor for VPN. It's not necessarily a requirement. We would recommend you two-factor anything that's being accessed remotely, but you may or may not have a two-factor solution readily in place, and your VPN solution may not easily support two-factor. Split tunneling is also a concern. So depending on how you've configured the rules in your VPN, you may allow traffic to go out this computer both to the corporate network over the VPN and out to the internet to access websites. And generally, we would recommend when you're using VPN, you have all traffic going to the corporate network and then going out to the internet from there. So you're taking advantage of your corporate firewall and its policies and controls, and you don't have to worry about what website someone might be going to directly from the device and how that can provide potentially an end-around security risk into your environment. Another popular remote access technology is remote desktop gateway, and this operates in a manner where we have a client computer, again, laptop, desktop, from outside the network. It goes through the corporate firewall, not using the traditional remote desktop wide open port of 3389 that is a high risk, but using 80, and we actually don't recommend 80, using 443, so it's an encrypted communication to the RD gateway server, and then once the client establishes a connection to the remote desktop gateway, they can then access a remote desktop server, or they can access a PC that is on the network via the remote desktop gateway. So if you have users at home that don't have a laptop and you want to have them connecting from their personal computer to their desktop at the office, this is great technology for that. The risk of exposure from this client device to this network is much less because we're only allowing traffic through that one port and only to this server and that one type of traffic, whereas a VPN could be a much larger range of traffic types. So we're narrowing the risk profile quite a bit. There's no direct access to the corporate network, as I just talked about, where there is with VPN. It's lower bandwidth utilization. All that's going back and forth from the from the computer in the office back to the remote client is screenshots back. And then on the client device, just keyboard and mouse movements are going back to the device you're remoting into. So especially for those high bandwidth applications, the application's still actually running here. It's not running across that slower connection, so it can be a real performance benefit. And this is the same with Citrix technology, and really this is a similar technology to what you're doing with potentially GoToMyPC or TeamViewer or those types of applications. The difference with those, instead of your gateway server controlling it, it's a server in the cloud that's controlling that connection between the remote client and the device on your network. It's generally easier for users. There's not as much steps they have to take to configure it and getting it working. It can be blocked by an ISP as well, so that's something that has to be considered. But it does work well with most devices. You can use it with a PC, you can use it with a Mac, you can use it with a Android or a iOS tablet. You can even use it with an iPhone if you want to. The screen's going to be very small, but it works. I have done it. There is, of course, a security risk for corporate access. Unlike VPN, where you have the application locally installed, if someone else sits down at that computer and they don't have the usernames and passwords to get into your applications, even if the VPN is active, there may not be an application risk. With remote desktop, if someone sits down in front of this remote computer and it's currently in the remote desktop session, then they're going to have access to everything that is available in that remote desktop session potentially. So it does have to be considered as well. We would say this is a must-have for two-factor because of the way this is being provided to the internet. What else is happening on the network at home should be an important consideration of home users. It's where that split tunneling conversation comes in, or how are they getting access to the internet? If you can, isolate the work device, put it behind a firewall, put it behind its own connection. What other devices are on the home network? Isolate TVs, smart home devices, gaming systems. This is a good idea anytime. I mean, if you can set up your home network this way and create different wireless networks for different types of devices, it's a good idea. There are a number of different types of risks for smart TVs and smart home devices that are different than your PCs, and you can't put the same type of security on them. There's a product out there called Fing, which is both a hardware and a piece of software that you can install that helps you understand and manage wireless traffic and traffic on your home network. A wired connection is always going to give you better performance than a wireless connection. So if you have users that are struggling with VPN or other connections over wireless, you may want to see if wired is an option. And making sure you're backing up and protecting data. If you've got corporate data stored on that work device that's working remotely, how are you making sure that it's being backed up? And if people are using their home computers to access and deal with data, making sure that they're not storing it locally and that it's still getting backed up and protected in some manner. And it's a good practice inside your network to lock your device when you're done and walking away from it. It's a good practice at home as well. So just right on the edge of our time, I just wanted to mention that we have a number of different things in place that we can potentially do to help you. Teams implementations, there's some free versions of Teams Microsoft has been made available for COVID-19. We can certainly help you with adding two-factor to any of your additional services, home PC health and assessment risk, potentially you need enhanced voice services for those home users, cybersecurity training, Teams training, the phishing simulation and testing. These are all things that we can potentially help with. And any questions? So we should open up the Q&A. You'll see it pop up in the top right-hand corner of your live event. It looks like sort of two notepads placed on top of each other, and it should have a little red dot beside it now. So hopefully if you have any questions, we'll be able to see those. And I'm just going to take a look and see if I've got any questions. Okay, I have one question. What can we do to maintain speed when there's too many users working remotely? So speed from users working remotely could be a variety of different issues. You could have an issue at the remote user's end. So that's where that Fing box I mentioned is a great example of a tool. There's even an app you can download and install that can help a person understand what the traffic on their home network is like and understand if that's where the bottleneck is. If it's potentially on the other side, all your remote users are having performance issues, either with remote desktop or VPN, then we may need to look at your firewall configuration and your traffic prioritization, and you may need to change the prioritization of the traffic in your network from what you've done in the past. Because you may have prioritized traffic based on everybody being in the office, and it may need to be different now if they're out of the office. Again, if you're using VPN as that primary communication method and you have some heavy bandwidth utilization applications, then you could potentially see some performance issues, and that's where a technology like remote desktop could potentially help quite a lot with that, whether you use it over the VPN or you leverage gateway services to use it directly over the internet. Any other questions? I'm going to make an announcement. Yeah, if there's no other questions, then I think we'll end the presentation here because we have gone right past the half hour. Certainly, if you do have any questions that weren't answered here, feel free to reach out to your account manager, give us a call, really contact anyone at Broadview Networks, and we can certainly help you with any follow-up questions. So with no other questions, thank you all very much for your time. I really appreciate it.